In 1959, the United States government owned more silver than any nation in the history of the world, over 2 billion ounces, enough to fill a train 7 miles long. By the early 2000s, that number was zero, not stolen, not lost in a war, not seized by an enemy. The government sold it, to itself, to industry, to ordinary Americans standing in line at the bank, and almost nobody alive today remembers it happening. Rewind to 1934. America is deep in the Great Depression. Franklin Roosevelt is rebuilding the entire structure of the American economy, and he decides silver needs to be part of the foundation. He signs the Silver Purchase Act. The United States Treasury becomes, essentially overnight, the largest buyer of silver on the entire planet. Not just buying American silver, buying it from mines across the globe, Mexico, Canada. Wherever silver existed, U.S. government checks were arriving to collect it. The silver flowed in for decades, slowly, steadily, building. By the early 1960s, the pile had become almost unimaginable, over 2 billion ounces sitting in government vaults, the largest concentration of silver ever assembled by a single nation in human history. This silver did 3 jobs at once. It backed paper currency called silver certificates, dollars you could physically walk into a bank and trade for metal. It supplied the silver inside every dime, quarter, and half dollar in American pockets, and it sat as a strategic reserve, insurance against war or economic catastrophe. It looked permanent, it looked untouchable. It was neither. Because right as the pile reached its historic peak, something started pulling it apart from the inside. The 1960s were an explosion of American consumer culture. Vending machines on every corner, coin-operated laundromats, parking meters lining every city street. All of it needed coins, millions of coins, circulating constantly. At the same time, something else was happening. Global demand for silver was climbing. Electronics, photography, industry was rediscovering how useful this metal actually was, and that created a problem nobody in 1934 could have predicted. Here's the trap, laid out simply. A silver dime is worth 10 cents because it says 10 cents on it, but it also contains actual silver, and that silver has its own separate value on the open market. For decades, the metal inside a dime was worth less than 10 cents. No problem. But by the early 1960s, rising silver prices meant the metal inside that dime was creeping toward being worth more than 10 cents. And Americans noticed. They started doing something the government never anticipated. They kept the silver coins. They spent the paper money instead. Nobody announced this. Nobody organized it. Millions of individual people independently made the same calculation at the same time. Why spend a coin worth more than its face value when you could just keep it? Banks started running out of coins. Vending machine operators were furious. Regions had to ration coin distribution just to keep commerce functioning. The United States government was watching its own currency disappear from circulation in real time, hoarded by its own citizens, for a reason the Treasury had never planned for. And they realized with growing horror exactly where this was heading. If they didn't act, Americans would eventually pull every silver coin out of existence. The entire strategic reserve would vanish into shoeboxes and coffee cans across the country. July 23, 1965, President Lyndon Johnson signs the Coinage Act. From this date forward, dimes and quarters would no longer contain silver at all. They'd be made from a copper-nickel alloy instead, the same basic composition still used today. The official explanation was economic. The country could no longer justify putting a valuable strategic metal into pocket change that people were simply going to hoard. But look at what this decision actually admits. The United States government in 1965 was publicly acknowledging that silver had become too valuable to spend. You'd think this would fix everything. Remove silver from coins, stop the hoarding, problem solved. It didn't, because coins were never actually the biggest drain. Something much larger was quietly consuming the reserve, and it was about to accelerate. After 1965, most people assumed the crisis was over. Instead, the drain got worse. America was in the middle of a genuine technological explosion. Televisions, radios, telephones, every one of these devices needed silver in their electrical contacts and switches. Not small amounts either. Millions of units manufactured constantly, each one consuming a sliver of the strategic reserve. And then there was the military and space program. Silver went into radar systems, communication equipment, and, remarkably, into the electronics that helped put American astronauts on the moon. The Apollo program itself was quietly powered in part by metal pulled straight from Treasury vaults. The government kept selling silver to meet this demand and to keep its promises to citizens still holding silver certificates. Every year, the pile got smaller. By the end of the 1970s, the 2 billion ounce mountain that had seemed inexhaustible 15 years earlier had almost entirely disappeared. What remained was a fraction, about 140 million ounces. Transferred to the Department of Defense and relabeled as a strategic military reserve, the largest silver stockpile in human history had shrunk by more than 90%, and the government still wasn't done selling. By the mid-1980s, officials looked at what remained of the reserve and reached a strange conclusion. They decided holding onto it no longer made strategic sense at all. Some in Congress proposed simply selling it off directly to raise cash. But dumping that much silver on the market at once would crash prices and cause chaos, so they chose a quieter method. In 1986, the American Silver Eagle investment coin was introduced, and by law, it had to be struck using silver drawn directly from the government's remaining stockpile. Every year afterward, millions of ounces flowed out of Treasury vaults, transformed into collectible coins, and sold to private investors and collectors across the country. There was no scandal, no dramatic announcement, no investigative headline. It simply drained, quietly, steadily, year after year. By 2002, it was gone, completely. The nation that once held the largest silver reserve on Earth no longer possessed a single government-owned ounce. To keep minting the same Silver Eagle coins that had been draining the reserve for 16 years, the Treasury now had to go out and buy silver on the open market like everyone else. The mountain had eaten itself. Here's where this story turns from historical curiosity into something that should genuinely bother you. In the 1960s, silver traded for roughly $1 an ounce. By January 2026, silver hit an all-time high of $121.64 per ounce. If the United States still held that original 2.1 billion ounce reserve today at that price, it would be worth roughly $243 billion. Gone. Sold decades ago for a tiny fraction of that value, but the money isn't even the most alarming part. Silver isn't just a shiny metal anymore. It's essential for solar panels, electric vehicles, advanced military systems, and artificial intelligence hardware. Modern civilization runs on it in ways nobody in 1965 could have predicted, and while America was selling off its reserve, other nations were paying close attention. China has recently begun restricting silver exports entirely, holding the metal back specifically for its own manufacturing needs. Chinese solar panel production alone consumes roughly 1/5 of all silver mined on Earth each year. The nation that spent 60 years quietly emptying its silver vaults is now watching a critical 21st century resource concentrate in the hands of other countries. And here's the detail that should stay with you. The United States government is now actively discussing whether to rebuild a strategic silver reserve. The same reserve it spent, ounce by ounce, decade after decade, convinced it would never be needed again. Whatever gets rebuilt now will have to be purchased at today's prices, not the $1 an ounce America paid when it was stockpiling silver in the 1930s and 40s. The country that once owned the mountain for pennies may soon have to buy it back for a fortune. Nobody stole America's silver, nobody invaded and seized it. There was no single scandal, no single villain, no single day where it all went wrong. It disappeared through hundreds of individually reasonable decisions made across 70 years by people who never imagined how valuable that metal would eventually become. Do you think this was an unavoidable mistake or one of the most costly oversights in American economic history? Let me know in the comments. And if this changed how you think about the money in your pocket, subscribe. There's a lot more hidden in plain sight that we haven't covered yet.